The future of Resident Evil is looking really interesting. It's a little crazy, but awesome at the same time. We all know that there is a good chunk of Resident Evil games that are being worked on as we speak, which is what we're going to talk about today. So let's go over what we can expect to see with the future of the Resident Evil franchise, from 2025 all the way down the line, going over some leaks, interviews with Capcom, and the current mission to remake and or preserve the classics that started it all. Now, if you've been following closely to the news and leaks about this series, you might not get much more info here. There's nothing groundbreaking I'm going to talk about. This is going to be more of a roadmap of what to expect from the series within the next few years. So, with all that being said, to kick it off, we're going to start with the most recent Capcom showcase, where Resident Evil 7 director Koshi Nakanashi, and if I said that wrong, I do apologize, he confirmed his involvement in the next mainline title, Resident Evil 9. Now, with his experience with Resident Evil 7 and Revelations, and serving as a designer on Resident Evil 5, which I love the way that game looks a lot of the time, it's safe to assume that Resident Evil 9 is definitely going to stick to a more survival horror style, with Resident Evil 7 being a great example. I think it's safe to say that Resident Evil 9 is in good hands, in terms of horror. Resident Evil 7, while different from any other game in the series, at least up until that point, it did a really great job reinventing the series. Nakanashi understands what makes Resident Evil great. He says at the showcase that Resident Evil has to be scary. And while I enjoyed Village, it did start leaning a little too heavy into the action, at least when you compare it to 7. While he goes on to say it was difficult to figure out where to go after 7, he found it, and what he found is substantial, that's what he said, which makes Resident Evil 9 sound super promising. I love 7, and I really trust this man, and if he says he found a great idea, then I'm hyped. And if the Resident Evil 9 leaks are believed to be true, this will be the biggest Resident Evil to date, and that in itself is just awesome, with the potential of a big open world to explore, featuring some of the beloved Resident Evil characters of the past. Doubling down on the horror aspect? Hell yeah. It's said that Resident Evil 9 started development in 2018, which makes it the longest development a Resident Evil game has ever gotten. But that does mean, at least in terms of gameplay and maybe even story, a lot could have changed over the years, as it tries to find its identity, purpose, and just overall place in the franchise. I think it's better when a game has time to cook. And while this makes me hyped, Resident Evil 9 does have some mixed feelings, at least in the community, especially with the idea of Resident Evil 9 being an open world game. But I think that this title, from what I've seen and read, I think it's in some really good hands. But moving down the line, 2025 might be another year we get a Resident Evil remake. Late last year, after the release of Resident Evil 4 Remake, Capcom confirmed the plan to continue to release more remakes. And it's more than likely that Resident Evil 9 is probably going to drop sometime in 2026, maybe early 2026, but we don't know yet. So in that time that we're waiting, we could see a new remake coming, as we usually get one every other year. So the big question, as there's no confirmation yet, the big question is, what game is it going to be? There's a few they can do. They could do Resident Evil 5 or the original Resident Evil, as the 30-year anniversary is coming up in 2026. Most leaks and rumors seem to think it'll be either Resident Evil Code Veronica or Resident Evil 0, which all sounds good to me. And of course, we do have to take these leaks with a grain of salt. There's no actual confirmation other than the fact that Capcom does plan to keep making remakes for now. What do you think the next remake will be? I'm going to say either Code Veronica or Resident Evil 0. I'm going to agree with the rumors. I mean, any of them would make sense. Going back to the original Resident Evil as the 30-year anniversary is coming up makes sense, but we technically already had a remake for the GameCube, even though it was like 20 years ago now. But we do have that. Resident Evil 5 makes sense as they just did 4, and you can just continue down the line with 5. Code Veronica is a fan favorite and one that was kind of, I feel like, overlooked at the time. But Resident Evil 0 honestly sounds like maybe the best bet, as we do have remakes for 1 to 4, and it would make sense to definitely go back to Resident Evil 0 as that's the prequel. That's how it shows you how everything got started, and then with the next remake doing Code Veronica, and then whatever they want after that. But it depends. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. If you're into VR, Capcom plans to bring all of its titles to VR so far. They recently did a Village one and, of course, RE4. I don't have much on it except that, as I don't really play much VR. I haven't played much VR, but some of these Resident Evil VR modes have a decent amount of praise. I'll try to link some articles down below, but that is another thing coming down the line that's part of the roadmap, if you will, that if you are a big fan of VR, they are going to do a lot more titles in the future. So lastly, there's an OG Resident Evil resurgence, with the OG trilogy being put on PC by GOG. At this moment, the first Resident Evil is the only one you can play, at the time of making this video at least, with 2 and 3 coming soon, which is just awesome for Resident Evil fans, preserving the originals for players to play with cleaned up visuals, controller support, some settings that players can tweak with to do shit if they want, to kind of adapt it if they want to, messing with the controls. And the only thing I hope to see very, very soon, obviously after they release 2 and 3 on PC, is a console port of this, as there are a decent amount of players, Resident Evil players, that play console. But I would expect that to be the plan anyway. But it's super cool to not only have remakes of these games, but to see these originals kind of being preserved in their own right, as I think most OG games should be. All in all, the Resident Evil franchise is a beast, and with classic titles being preserved and more dedicated remakes on the way, along with the continued VR support, I'd say this series is at its best. And I can't wait for Resident Evil 9 and the next upcoming remake, whatever they do. The future for Resident Evil looks bright. But what do you think? Are you hyped for Resident Evil 9? What do you think the next remake will be? Let me know in the comments below. But if you made it this far in the video, thank you. You're awesome. If you like this video, be sure to share, like, and subscribe to see more of what I've done and what's to come, and to support the channel. But anyways, thanks for coming, and thanks for watching.